This is quite a welcome back. I appreciate your kind applause and your kind support. But I want to say right off that this victory was not something that I did alone in any way. This was a victory that started a long time ago by a group of dedicated people in this community who had the seeds planted that made it possible to harvest the victory that we did. As I came in tonight and I saw faces that I recognized, two of the people that I saw were jurors in this case. They came tonight to be a part of this celebration. I can assure you that those jurors, when they were chosen, intended to do the right thing and to be fair. And had we not been able to prove our case, we would not have won. But as I watched those particular two jurors during the case, I could see in their eyes the faces of the rest of the citizens of this county, and I could see them begin to realize in a stark way the evil man Richard Butler is and always has been. It's nice to celebrate this wonderful victory, which one we hope that will remain a victory, and with the help of your wonderful and Idaho citizen and your friend Greg Carr, who's making possible the forming of an institute for teaching tolerance and not hatred on Rimrock Road, I think it will be successful. But for you to really understand why we're here tonight, I want to take you back to a night on July 1st, 1998. Victoria Keenan and her son, Jason, had a wonderful time at a wedding. They had gotten in their automobile, minding their own business, and drove home down the back roads because they had been separated for a number of months. He'd been off to school. And as they drove by the Aryan Nations compound, an item dropped out of the car window that Jason had in his hand. He was discussing with his mother. They drove up the road, turned around, came back to pick it up, and then left, like any other citizen might do. They didn't even realize when they stopped that they were anywhere near the Aryan Nations compound, nor did they realize that armed guards were hiding in the trees. As they drove away, though, they began to be pursued by a pickup truck driving at high speed. In a few moments, shots were ringing out from an assault rifle, riddling bullets through the back of their automobile. They thought their life was over. They said their goodbyes, and in a desperate move to try to avoid the attackers, Victoria even considered driving out through the woods on a farm road going as fast as a little 22-year-old car would go. But instead, she stayed on the road. Her tire was shot out. She crashed the car into the ditch. These Aryan Nation guards jumped out, shouted death threats, beat her and her son, marched single file back to their truck, gave a Sieg Heil salute, shouted out the tag number on her automobile, and told her and her son that if this was ever reported, they'd be killed. Fortunately, one of your good citizens, Mike Roth, was watching the whole thing from his porch. He had heard the shots. He had gotten his gun to protect his family. And he saw them and called them to his house to safety. The police came that night. They did an investigation, the sheriff's department, I should say. They did an investigation. They took a picture or two. But that's when things went really bad wrong. Had this incident happened anywhere else in the United States, I dare say, if citizens driving down the road were assaulted with an assault rifle, their car was shot full of holes, and witnesses saw who did it, and screaming things like, "Don't mess with the Aryans," I think we all know what would have happened. First of all, that car would have been impounded. It would have been taken in for evidence. Fingerprints would have been taken from it. The bullet fragments would have been taken out of the automobile to compare later. But none of that happened. The car tire was changed, and Victoria and Jason drove on their way. The culprits were well known. A week later, a deputy sheriff who's very friendly with the Aryan Nations compound and keeps in touch with them, he drives over to the Aryan Nations compound and says, "Hey, look, we can't have any more of this shooting into cars. I'm going to talk to you about this. But you got a march coming on next week, and so I don't want to disturb you too much now, but when your march is over, I want to talk to you." Well, he called Victoria Keenan the next day and said, "Would you like to press charges?" And what do you think she said? Absolutely not, because she was absolutely terrified. And that would have been the end of the matter. This grave injustice would have gone unrequited. There would have been no court case. There would have been no criminal case. The culprits would have gone forever. And I think the reason why this attitude was taken concerning this assault with intent to murder, not aggravated assault, was because of several things. One is, I think this community had become almost inured and numbed to the actions of Richard Butler and the thugs that he brought into this community from prisons all around the United States. Bill Wathman's house was bombed. Buildings were bombed downtown. People were killed on a regular basis connected with this. The Spokesman Review newspaper office was bombed. Denver radio talk show host Alan Berg lost his life because of the teachings of Richard Butler. And so nothing happened, and nothing would have happened, except for the brave group of people who make possible the reason we're here tonight, this Human Rights Task Force. Because they didn't just simply let the injustice that took place out on Rimrock Road go unpunished. Tony Stewart and Norm Gissel and others got in touch with Victoria Keenan and said, we're behind you, we believe in you, and we want to help you. But she was still afraid because she didn't get calls from high authorities, people that ought to have gotten in touch with her and stood behind her. She was terrified. She was all alone. And so finally, after several repeated attempts to get her to go to the police, she finally did. Nowhere in the United States would a serious crime of this nature the prosecution be left up to the victim. That's almost unheard of. It just doesn't happen. There were witnesses. They knew who did it. But this burden was put on this woman who was totally and absolutely terrified. But Norm Gissel and Tony and others gave her the courage and the support to finally get a prosecution initiated, and also to seek some legal representation and redress. I think that won't happen again in this community, and hopefully in no other community in the Northwest or anywhere in the United States. Because unless somebody confronts the schoolyard bully, he or she is going to continue to be that bully. But this community stood up. It stood up in the persons of those individuals who had the courage, the passion, and the desire to make sure that fairness and justice ruled out. Our nation has faced some dark times in the history of this country. Other places and other times have also had to confront similar situations where injustices occurred. I remember so well one of those times. The year was 1963. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was 10 days out of the Birmingham jail. I was about 3 years out of the University of Alabama Law School. And just as soon as he had been released from that jail, he wrote a letter. In fact, he wrote it while he was in jail, chastising the ministers, the white and black ministers, who frowned on his activities of trying to use young school children to break down the barriers of segregation. And a few weeks after he was out of that jail, Klansmen placed a bomb in the stairwell of the 16th Street Baptist Church, and 4 little Sunday school girls died there. What might have happened? What might have happened had the good people of Birmingham, Alabama, the mayor, the police chief, and others, stood up to Bull Connor and his police dogs and said in a loud, clear voice, "Not in our town." I'm not so sure that those Klansmen would have done what they did. But you know, Dr. King had faith. In that dark day of 1963, when he was no hero, there'd been no 64 Civil Rights Act, there'd been no 1965 Voting Rights Act, other powerful men in Congress blocked these very basic rights from becoming law. But Dr. King had faith in us. He had faith in you. He had faith in me, people there and people to come in the future. And he went to Washington, D.C. to express that faith in us. He stood on the Mall with 200,000 people at his feet and millions watching on television as he expressed that faith in us. He said that one day, I have a dream that in the red clay hills of Georgia, that the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will sit down around the table of brotherhood. Well, you know, a lot's happened since Dr. King left us. We've taken 3 steps forward and we've taken 2 steps back. Injustices and other acts of discrimination and bias and prejudice were spread all over this United States. It's no longer the purview of the South. But you know, I think if Dr. King was here today, I think he would still have faith in us, because he would see what people like you have done and what people like you are going to do in the future. And if he was making that speech today, he might say that I have a dream that one day in the red clay hills of Georgia, I think he might add, on the reservations, in the barrios, in the ghettos, and in the seats of economic and political and judicial power in this nation, that the sons and daughters of former slaves and the sons and daughters of former slave owners, and today, Dr. King might add, the homeless, the powerless, the poor, and those who hold the keys to the economic and political and judicial power in this nation will sit down around the table of personhood and truly learn to love one another. And to love one another, we have to love justice, because without justice there is no peace. Dr. King understood this so well. When he went around this nation at a time when our country was straying from the ideals of the founders, he understood the power of justice denied. He understood that the desire for justice has burned in the hearts of men and women since the beginning of time. And at a time when our country was straying, he told an old story about another nation at another time who was also straying. The year was 900 BC. The Jews the children of Israel, had wandered after being slaves in Egypt, had wandered from place to place, and finally, after suffering persecution and indignation and poverty, they founded a great city. And they built big walls around this city to protect it, and had big gates at the entrance of those walls for people to come in. And people in that town did very well. They prospered. They bought nice building lots, and they built beautiful homes overlooking valleys and fertile fields, and the marketplace was filled with stalls from goods brought in from far and wide, and they prospered there too. One farmer who brought his goods in from a neighboring village arrived early in the morning, his wagon laden with produce for his market in the stall. And as they opened those big gates, he saw things that bothered him. He saw able-bodied men and women begging for food. And upon inquiry, he found that, well, if they didn't know the right person, or if they wasn't in the right group, they didn't necessarily get a good job or any job at all. And then as he went in the marketplace, he heard grumbling from the people, and he inquired and found that, well, if you wasn't a member of the right group, then sometimes you got arrested for things other people didn't get arrested for. Or you got treated differently in the court systems than other people who had more power. And that bothered this farmer. He wanted these people to be successful. He was a man of some means and a man of reputation. You know this farmer. He was the prophet Amos. And he called for an audience with the leaders of that community. And they gave it to him, and he went before them, and he said, you know, you got a good thing here. He said, don't mess it up. You got a good school system. You got a good law enforcement system. You got a good court. You're prosperous. But you're not going to get to keep those things and pass them down to future generations, your children, your grandchildren, and others, unless you're fair to all the people. And he spoke to them those words that Dr. King used so often when he went around this nation talking to us, when we treated a large part of our population less than second class. He said, don't be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters. I think in this case in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, justice rolled down like waters. And it didn't roll down simply because I came to town, because Judge Hosak presided over a fair trial, or because we had good and honorable jurors. It happened because the seeds and the passion for justice that came to the aid of Victoria and Jason Keenan was deep in the hearts of the people who founded and the people who carried on the work of the Kootenai County Human Rights Task Force. And it is to Tony and Norm and Bill Wasmuth and some of you who I don't know the names of, that the real credit goes for making sure that justice was not denied. Your support here tonight for this organization is so important, because you're saying in a loud voice, not in our town. We're not going to have this in our town. And I think it's important to realize that of the 10,000 hate crimes that happened last year in the United States, less than 2% were connected with any hate group. They're our next door neighbors who don't like the gay people who move down the street, or the interracial couple, or those that are different. And that's why the work that Greg Carr has stepped in to help carry on is his Institute for Human Rights, and the work that they plan for this compound of hate that exists out on Rimrock Road is so important. It's important that each of you stay in the fight, that we examine ourselves and not take any solace because we wouldn't shoot at somebody driving down the road. But it's because of the inaction and the standing on the sidelines that allows people like Jason and Victoria to go home and curl up in a ball in their bed at night and feel alone, that nobody cares. But you care, and you're going to make this a big success. One of the things that I learned in this trial was that suing Richard Butler and taking away his compound will not stop intolerance in America. It's one thing that's important to do, but it really won't have a great effect on intolerance in America. It certainly stops Mr. Butler for a while. As I understand, and I saw him briefly standing out there on the street tonight, actually I felt sorry. I felt sorry for this sad old man who's going to live out his life bitter in hatred. I felt sorry for the young people that was standing by him out there, the 5 or 6 that he got to come. In fact, I wish they were sitting at this table right here so that we could talk with them today. Because I think it's extremely important that we include in our circle of love and affection, like Dr. King would include in his circle, those people who don't agree with us, those people who are different than us. I don't hate any of these people. In fact, 2 of the best witnesses in our case were former members of that organization that came forward, but by our accepting them, I think it really changed their lives. And I think when they told that jury their stories, they were believed. So I hope as you go forward that you truly will not be satisfied in this community and in this state until everything is done to ensure that the message of tolerance and love goes out. The Southern Poverty Law Center, as the lesson that we've learned from this case, are starting, and I'm proud to announce tonight, a website called tolerance.org. You can find it on your internet. You have to put www in front of it. I'm still on a manual typewriter. I think it's the only thing that the Unabomber Theodore Kaczynski and I have in common. But with a $2 million grant from Cisco and $3 million worth of free advertising from Yahoo, and hopefully the support of other web portals, we hope to take back the web from those 350 hate sites that now dominate it, up from 1 in 1995. We're going to do that in our operation and on the level that we operate on. In this community, though, I hope that you will stand behind this organization, that when Richard Butler does his march next time, I hope that you'll do what the city people of a town in Pennsylvania did. The Klan was coming to town to march, and so the governor of the state led a human rights march a week before. The police chief, the sheriff, leaders in the community, and 2,000 citizens followed them down the street. And then when the Klan marched a week later, the message had already been sent that you're not welcome in our community. You have the First Amendment right to march. We're not going to stand and fight you or even look at you because we've already said that we're better than that. And I hope that the governor of this state, your state representatives, your congressmen, because this isn't just a Coeur d'Alene issue, I hope that all these citizens will join together, and each of you in this room, just think, if you brought 3 people with you, and if you marched in a march for fairness and justice, that would be the front page story. And I know you'll do that, because I know you'll not be satisfied until justice does truly roll down like waters. Thank you.